and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I acknowledge that a lot of people are in different spots today, so please feel free to acknowledge the traditional custodians where you are over the chat. Just a few housekeeping notes before I introduce our two guests and our exciting topic today of volunteer impact reporting. In the interest of all other listeners, you should please keep yourself on mute throughout the webinar. There's a public chat box where you can send messages or hellos to different participants, and you can ask questions through that public chat box later on. At the end of this webinar, a recording will be available via Volunteering Victoria's website for you to watch the webinar and rewatch the webinar. So without further ado, let me introduce my two guests, Megan and Heather. Megan is a certified professional leader in volunteers. Having worked in volunteer management for 10 years, Megan provides strategic direction, advice and guidance to managers of volunteers at Oxfam Australia. She assists in the placement of interns and volunteers at Oxfam and facilitates partnerships with career trackers and Monash University. Megan is passionate about diversity and inclusion and is currently leading a review on the recruitment process at Oxfam for both staff and volunteers. Megan is an active member of Volunteering Victoria in her second year of being a mentor and onto her third webinar. Thanks, Megan. She's volunteered her time to assist in the facilitation of the Managers of Volunteers Network in Melbourne and was a board member of the Australasian Association for Managers of Volunteers, ARMOV. Currently, Megan volunteers at Panda as a community education and training volunteer, helping to deliver education sessions to community groups across Melbourne and Victoria. So Heather Moorecroft is a Senior Strategic Advisor at Spark Strategy, a social impact advisory firm. She's also a board director at KidSafe Victoria, who are focused on creating a safer world for our kids at home, on the go, and at play. With experience in the not-for-profit, university and private sectors and qualifications in business management, economics, history and project management, Heather is committed to organisations and solutions that drive social, environmental impact and financial sustainability. In her role at Spark Strategy, Heather's focus is on creating strategies and solutions that blend purpose, profit and pragmatism. While at Spark, Heather has worked with over 60 for-purpose organisations to develop strategic plans, business models, impact assessment frameworks, and other strategic projects that blend greater impact with financial resilience. She has expertise and interest in the not-for-profit strategy, gender equity, and primary prevention and early intervention. Hi, Megan and Heather. Thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for the intro.
Wonderful. So for those of you who are our regular webinar participants, we will do our first few introductory questions, but after that, today's webinar format is going to be slightly different because we have Heather, who is an impact assessment expert. So she'll go through some of the basics of volunteer impact assessment, and then Megan will talk about her experience at Oxfam. So a little less panel discussion than we might have had previously, but we're excited to have these two both share their experiences in this really exciting and interesting area. So, Megan, will you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role?
Sure thing. Thanks, Sarah. So I am the Volunteer Engagement Manager at Oxfam Australia. You can see our little spiel there on the slide. So I've been at Oxfam, well, I'm saying now 10 years and 2 babies. So it's been a while. I've been there, in a few different roles, and now I manage the volunteer program. I manage it there. So it's quite a busy role. I'll do that all in 3 days a week.
That's a lot to cover in 3 days a week in terms of all of the realms of responsibility that you have. That's pretty amazing. So Heather, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Spark Strategy?
Yeah, thanks so much, Sarah, and delighted to be here, everyone, with you this afternoon. I've actually had a role change in the last couple of months. So I'm the Associate Director at Spark, and I look after a few things here within our business. So I look after our marketing and our external partnerships, and then I also work across our consulting projects. So I'm currently working with a whole range of people within our team and 10 different organizations on strategic planning, theory of change, looking at their business model and other projects. And just for those of you who haven't come across Spark before, we're a certified B Corporation. So we've got that stamp of approval as an ethical business. And we're a for-purpose consultancy. So all of the advisory work we do is with teams and organizations like yourselves who are trying to make the world a better place. And that includes health, disability, arts and culture, sports and recreation, veterans, youth. If it's looking to make the world better and more positive, we'll work with those teams and those organizations. So thanks so much, Sarah.
Fantastic. And given, for those of you who have logged onto these webinars before, I always ask people how they got involved in volunteer management. And because Heather doesn't work specifically in volunteer management, and Megan has told her story here a couple of times before, we thought we would just ask Heather and Megan to give us a short, sharp, interesting fact about themselves. So Heather, did you want to go first?
Yeah, happy to kick off with something random. So I grew up in Scotland in the UK, and part of my family on the Scottish side are bagpipe makers. So it doesn't get much more Scottish than that. So I thought, yeah, I'd share that as a little bit of trivia today.
Fantastic. Thanks, Heather. Megan.
Thank you, Sarah. So my random bit of information is that I've actually trained to be in the Army. So when I was in year 7, we had representatives from the Army, the Navy and the Air Force come to our school to try and entice young students to come and join the Defence Forces. And I said in year 7, I'm going to join the Army. And then I got to the end of year 12, and about a year after, I thought, oh, geez, I better do it. So I went off and did it.
Wow, that is a random fact I definitely did not know about you, Megan, but is entirely consistent, I think, with what I know about you, which is when you make a decision to do things, you follow through. So thank you for sharing. That is awesome.
No worries.
We might have to incorporate random facts once we've done the rounds with origin stories. But as I promised, we're now going to talk I'm going to throw to Heather to give us a little bit of an understanding of what is impact assessment, because and impact reporting, because I think, it's often one of those words that you hear around the ether. And so Heather's really going to break it down. So over to you, Heather.
Great, thank you. So some of you might have heard the language of impact assessment or impact measurement, or heard someone say, oh, we really need to demonstrate our impact, articulate it, assess it, whatever that language is. That's what I'm going to be talking about just now. So if we flick to the next slide, I've essentially broken it down into 3 components. So the first thing here is about moving beyond counting your activities. So we're all busy every day, but what does that activity lead to? What is the so what of our busyness? And in the for-purpose sector, we think of that so what as the medium and the long-term change that we're contributing to. And many of you might be using the language of outcomes and impact to think about that medium and long-term change. I think the other key component of impact measurement or impact assessment, depending what language you want to use, is that qualitative and quantitative component. So how are you using lived experience, case studies, expert opinion, as well as hard data and statistics to really demonstrate your impact and tell your story? We might move over onto the next slide. I touched on this already, but wow, there is just so much terminology and jargon and different words used in this space. We hear of monitoring and evaluation, program logic, theory of change. People might talk about metrics or measures or indicators. And there's sort of a question of what are those things and what do they mean? And I think the key thing to take away is this field is really evolving, and lots of people are trying to figure out what is the best language and what is the best path forward. But I think a couple of key terms that I'd like to step through. So impact measurement or impact assessment is what we described on the previous page. And then monitoring and evaluation is actually the process to gather the data and then use that data and apply it to your decision making. So your impact measurement framework is the overall approach to outcomes and impact. And then the monitoring and evaluation is sort of the getting your hands dirty and getting stuck into that. We might tick over onto the next one. Sort of another question there, why bother with this? Why does it matter? And you can see those visuals on your screen there. The first thing is, if we understand better about our outcomes and our impact, we can make better strategic decisions. And that's absolutely critical. I think many of us, we're resource constrained. We can't do everything. So how do we decide what to do and what not to do? And impact measurement can really help us with that. In addition, on that strategic thinking, impact measurement can help identify our strengths, our opportunities, and where the gaps are or where the need is. So again, really critical for that strategic decision making. The second piece there is about building your evidence base. Many of us, again, will have had that experience of people saying, prove it. You think you're doing this, but prove it. Show me the data, show me the stories that back that up. And that proof can then be helpful for storytelling, for reporting, for comms, which is where we'll go to next. So the next reason this can be really helpful is for those powerful communications. And impact measurement can be really useful in communicating who you are, what you do, why you do it, and what change that leads to. Often, again, with this kind of work, we might end up with a really powerful narrative, a couple of paragraphs, or some sort of diagram that really shows we're doing X and it leads to Y, and just visually or in a narrative way representing that really powerfully. For your team, this can be really great for motivating and inspiring. And if we go to the next sort of bubble on the screen, for external partners or funders, it can be really valuable and can be a way to show that you're aligned with them, using their language, building that evidence base, and showing you're meeting their values and their requirements.
Absolutely. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say.
No, Sarah.
Absolutely. I think that's a really clear framework in terms of really articulating why it is important to get your head around all of those crazy terminology terms that you had in the slide previous. So I was going to, and I just wanted to, I guess, I asked Heather to talk us through a little bit of a small framework for a simple framework for impact assessment and, really, I guess, step you through how you might start approaching this at your organisation. So I'll throw it back to you, Heather.
Great. We can go to the one I prepared earlier. So thanks, Sarah. Fantastic. So I'm just going to talk you through 3 key process steps that we at Spark recommend you use when you're thinking about impact assessment and thinking about impact measurement. And this applies to your volunteers and understanding the outcome and impact of volunteering, but also to the other parts of your organisation. So hopefully it's helpful for both of those areas of your team and your business. The first process step that we suggest is a theory of change. So that maps out what is the context we operate in, what are we doing in response, and so what for the medium and the long term. If we click through, we'll go to the second phase. Thanks, Sarah, which is now that we have a theory of change that maps out what the context is, what we're doing, and what that leads to, the next thing is to build the evidence base hanging off of that theory of change. So how can we evidence our outcomes? How can we evidence our impact? And where are the assumptions that we say, there's not evidence yet, but we're pretty sure that when we do this, it leads to this other positive change. And the third piece, I'm sure many of you will be really familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, but more and more we're seeing funding organizations and then grant-seeking organizations aligning to the SDGs and using that as a common language, a common framework to really show how they're supporting one another and driving that global change. If we move forward, what I've just done here is put out the elements of a theory of change just on the one slide. So I mentioned earlier, mapping your environmental context. The next piece there is about inputs and enablers. So what do you actually need to have in place for your activities to be successful? That's what that component is. If we then move to activities, that's about the programs you're running, the information you're providing, any advocacy campaigns, all those things that keep us busy. That's the doing. And the outputs are the very tangible, immediate results of those. So in some areas, if you make a change to a program, you might have a very immediate, direct environmental impact, or a number of people meeting each other for the first time, and those could be your outputs. Those outputs, and again, this is where the assumptions and the evidence come in, but they lead to your medium-term outcomes and your long-term impact. So if we had an output about number of people who have met each other, the outcomes and the impact might be about meaningful ongoing relationships and deep social connection, rather than those just kind of one-off interactions which happen at the output level. I think, Sarah, there's a bit more content on this screen if we sort of click through. Yeah, great.
Amazing. Sorry about that.
No, that's all good. These little tricksy animations that I've put
so sophisticated.
Yeah, that's as high tech as it gets. So I stepped you through the framework there from left to right. But what we actually suggest is start with your impact. Ask yourself, what does success look like for our volunteers? What does success look like for our community? And start with that really big picture, and then work your way back. Think about the context, think about what you're doing, think about what that leads to, and really interrogate whether those assumptions are legitimate, or whether actually we need to rethink what we're doing to have the impact we're seeking. We might flick on to the next slide. So that was phase one. That was about building your theory of change. The second part of the process is that evidence and assumptions. So step one here, pretty easy. What data are you already collecting? Maybe you've got number of volunteers and number of volunteer hours. Maybe you've got that number of meaningful relationships, which I mentioned previously, or case studies of those really quality social connections. So sort of understanding all the things that you have already. Step two is then saying, what else could we collect? What is local government collecting? Is there information in the ABS, the Australian Bureau of Statistics? Could we look at strapping a GoPro to someone and creating some sort of video montage that shows a day in the life of a volunteer? Like, what else could we do to link in with and evidence our theory of change? And then third, and really, really important, prioritize. Often it's easy to end up with 531 indicators or pieces of data that you're tracking, and that becomes really unwieldy really quickly. So really, really make sure you prioritize, and then think about, how are you going to collect that data? How are you going to store it? Where are you going to get it from? I think there's a little bit more content about this on the next slide. So, we talked there about selecting your sources and your tools, and I've popped a few key questions on the screen there. So who are you collecting the data from? Is it from someone like Megan, who's managing volunteers and understands their experiences and can share really pertinent insights? Or is it from the volunteers themselves or the people that they're supporting? What type of data should you collect? Qualitative, quantitative, there's a whole other way, a lot of ways to think about that. When should you collect this data? So what's the frequency? Do you need it every month? Do you need it every year? Is it actually something that you probably want to collect every 5 years because it's pretty arduous to gather it and do that in a meaningful way? And then how will you collect the data? Is it about small focus group discussions? Is it survey results? Is it looking at attendance sign-in sheets? And again, that can come in lots and lots of forms. And I've just popped an example down the bottom there. We did some theory of change work with Youth Projects, who are a youth support and homelessness service. And this was just an example of how this part of the process fell out for them. We might move on again, Sarah.
Absolutely. But I think, you know, it's so good the way you've mapped everything is super clear, and really just broken down all those different bits, you know, bits of evidence and data that you can collect, who, where, what, etc.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I think this space is super intimidating, and lots of us, it feels quite scary and quite big and technical. And if you can break it down into these little chunks, it becomes much more manageable. So yeah, really glad to hear that, Sarah. I think in thinking about evidence and assumptions, I've popped up there on the screen 4 ways you can think about that. So what are you already collecting? You're probably collecting a lot. What are other people collecting? They're collecting a lot of data and a lot of evidence and a lot of stories. Can you tap into that rather than duplicating those efforts? Next, is there published research findings? Maybe it's from Canada or Norway about, you know, a volunteer's experience doing X. And even though it's not your organization or your country, it might be really relevant and it might actually build your evidence base. And then finally, looking at where are those gaps and needs around research and around evidence, and how can we fill them? Is it us just going out and collecting the data ourselves? Is it a university partnership? Again, lots of ways to do that also. And then if we go back to those initial 3 big process steps I talked through, the Sustainable Development Goal alignment is the 3rd big step there. Again, I'm sure many of you are familiar with these, but set up in 2015, 17 global goals for people, planet, and prosperity. And they're really powerful. I think for any of you who have actually sat down and gone through the detail and the case studies and what's the ambitious targets that are set within these, they're really compelling and they're really comprehensive. And there are not that many frameworks which at a global level really capture so much inspiration and aspiration in the one place. The key takeaway here from me is not to map at the goal level. So if you're a healthcare organization, it's pretty easy for you to say, sure, we contribute to goal 3, good health and well-being. But have you looked at the specific targets and indicators that sit under goal 3 and provide a lot more detail? And maybe those actually give you some ideas of what evidence and what data you could collect, because they're very specific. And I think the risk of, if we map to this high level, these 17 goals, we can easily become quite tokenistic and you know, some of you might have heard the term rainbow washing, and we really, really want to avoid that. Really want to avoid tokenism here. So Sarah touched on at the start, you know, impact measurement, impact reporting. Let's say you've gone away, you've got a beautiful theory of change, you understand the role that volunteers play in your organization, thought about the medium-term outcomes and the long-term impact. How do you share that back to people in a really powerful way? And I know Megan's going to give us a few examples, but this is where that impact reporting comes in. And for some organizations, this could be updating your annual report to have more of a focus on outcomes and impact. For others, it's about separate reports, either for funders or just standalone entirely. And on the screen there, you can see a few key points that are up there. This is not a cut and dry, there's only one way to do impact reporting. Instead, it's kind of a checklist for yourself to say, what's the purpose of our impact report? What do we want it to achieve? Who's the audience? Who do we want to read this? And how do we want them to feel? How do we want them to react? What format do we want to have it in? Do we want a video with our CEO speaking and our volunteers sharing their experiences, or a really visual infographic or a written narrative or piece of information? And then what are the channels that we will share our impact report with the world? You know, how will we get it out there? Is it about social media or having it on our employee notice board or something else? So my suggestion is, if you sort of run through those points, you can think about how can we shape our impact report to be most relevant for us.
Fantastic. And then I did actually ask Heather just very quickly, because she's worked with so many organisations in the for-purpose sector, to outline some of the common challenges. And the first one, I believe she really has already spoken to a little bit, but I'll hand back to you, Heather.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. It's definitely sort of covered this one, but it is easy to be intimidated by this space. And I think if you're feeling that way, sort of just getting stuck in and muddling around and finding out that you're probably much more capable and experienced than you might have initially thought. So get stuck in. The next common challenge that we see is people really staying at that activity level, still measuring the number of programs, the number of attendees, and not thinking about the so what. So if you find that your data collection is really easy, you might be sticking with activities. It might be time to challenge yourself a bit more. Too much or too little data is probably pretty self-explanatory, but if you have those 500 odd indicators that you're tracking, it's just not going to be meaningful. It'll be so much content that people get lost in it. So how can you prioritize? And if you don't have enough data, then it becomes not strong proof and not comprehensive. So that is a fine line to walk. And if you find the answer there, let me know, because I think the rest of us are still figuring that one out ourselves. And the last key challenge that we see is this notion of contribution versus attribution. So contribution is when we say a number of us are contributing to this positive change in society. So if we see rates of social isolation go down, we might say that's to do with lots of different organizations and individuals acting, and we're all contributing. Versus attribution, where we say, this was really me. Me or my organization, we did this, and it directly led and was mainly responsible for a particular outcome. So again, that's where your assumptions and your evidence are really important, because in some areas you might say we can attribute this to ourselves, and in others you might say we're a contributor to the bigger picture.
Fantastic, Heather. That is such a really good breakdown of some of the common challenges, but also the way in which you do have to start thinking about this. And I guess to really start thinking about someone who really did just dive in and start thinking about impact reporting, we'll now throw over to Megan. And I guess the first question I have for you, Megan, is really, how did you come to volunteer impact reporting? And, tell us a little bit about that, Megan.
Sure thing. Thanks, Sarah. And thank you, Heather. I was writing down notes as you were talking, so this is really great for me as well. So you'll see the slide there. I actually, in a preparation for this webinar, I jumped on the Oxfam Australia website and just looked at previous annual reports, because I know, as I mentioned before, I've been at Oxfam for 10 years. So for me, volunteer impact reporting, or sort of reporting on return on investment of volunteers and all those different types of ways that you can describe it, for me has been something that's just been brewing for many years. I knew there needed to be more than just reporting on hours contributed by volunteers. So you'll see in the slide here, I've got 3 different examples of annual reports. So we've gone from simply outlining hours contributed in 2015 to an impact story about a long-term volunteer in 2018. And then last year, 2020, we used a dollar handle, which is a fundraising term for providing an illustration of what a certain donation amount will go towards. So we have, just from our external sort of annual reporting side of things. We've changed the way that we showcase volunteers and volunteer contribution. I really wanted to move away from outlining the monetary value, because I don't feel this tells volunteers themselves or our supporters or anyone who's reading our reports what volunteers have actually achieved, what their skills are, or even what parts of the organisation they work in. So in addition to making changes to our annual report, we also began expanding our metrics to include some demographical data and noting the number of volunteers in each section of the organisation. So thanks for changing that, Sarah. So this slide shows a quarterly report from 2018. And the reports from that time, we just sort of did it in an Excel spreadsheet. So I've just grabbed a few of the little images from that. And this we really did just for our own team purpose. So we just started as a way for my team to focus on the areas of the organisation that were not engaging volunteers well or regularly. Helped us to identify volunteer champions throughout the organisation who had a lot of volunteers and what sort of volunteers were coming into certain parts of the organisation. And we were also able to add this demographical data to our staff data. So we were able to look at differences or similarities between volunteer and staff data. What we also found through all of this is that a lot of staff were volunteers first. So it was interesting to see that as well. So moving on from these expanded metrics, we considered looking at some sort of return on investment strategies, such as measuring community reach and other quantifiable tasks that could be showcased. And this is, thanks, Sarah, this is sort of the first look at our guess at how to do an impact report. So this is what it looks like for us at the end of 2019. So in December, it was actually released in December 2019. We released our first official volunteer impact report, looking at the period from July to September. So we had made the decision to base it on a quarterly period. And we literally just made it up. We decided, okay, we'll just cover the basics. We'll do a very amateur infographic outlining all our stats, which you can see there. We had a table showing hours. Oh no, that's the next, not that one.
Sorry. I'm trying to be too good, Megan. Continue.
Just a couple of things. Yeah, so we had a table showing hours and where volunteers contributed their time. So we showed people, where we had volunteers in different areas of our organisation, as well as a list of different volunteer and intern roles. We also had included a case study of a volunteer role. So we had our volunteer manager talk about what a volunteer had done in their team and what they'd contributed to. We had included feedback, which is provided by volunteers on their experience. So when we do record hours, we don't just record volunteer hours, we also ask the volunteers to give a rating, and we also give them the option to write some text on how they found their experience working or volunteering that particular day or that particular shift. And we actually follow up on that and make sure that if anyone basically says that their experience was less than perfect, we would always follow up with them and just make sure that everything was okay, because we obviously don't have oversight of what happens every single day with every single volunteer. And then we had a list of recommendations on how we could sort of use that data and what we were going to do to improve our volunteer program. And then now the next slide, Sarah, thank you. So this is just a couple of pages from our most recent impact report. So our infographic got a little bit prettier. We recruited our in-house graphic designer to help with that, which I was very excited about. And then we started the report. We've started the report quite differently by outlining key findings. So, if people didn't want to read the entire report, they didn't have to. They could just have a quick browse at the first couple of pages just to see what we were going to be talking about. And obviously, the remainder of the report was the detail. We had a full page of a volunteer spotlight, and we had our financial and non-financial impacts that was demonstrated separately. We also included a literature review and actions taken since the previous impact report. So that's sort of just a really quick overview of what we've done so far.
I think it's really awesome. I, just want to thank you, Megan, for sharing how that report has evolved, because I think this really hits home to that intimidation factor. You don't have to get it right in your first report. Not that anything was wrong with the first report, but it really does just emphasize that this is a process of learning. Yeah. So I guess the next question I sort of had for you is, what have been the key learnings or takeaways from the process of impact reporting, and what, what would you suggest are the key things for people to think about if they're hoping to get started with it?
Yeah, I mean, when I thought about this question, this came to my mind: keep it simple, stupid. Because what we actually tried to do was we actually went from quarterly reporting to 6 monthly reporting, because we found after doing the quarterly reports a few times that it was just too much. We were trying to do too much, and it was taking a lot of time out of our sort of day-to-day, tasks. So we really scaled it back in our last one. I think the one of the key things is and actually Heather mentioned this in hers, is like not providing too much data. We introduced a literature review on current topics. Like a couple of the ones that we did were, mental health impacts on volunteering in the context of COVID-19. We did that last year, and we did a literature review on social and knowledge capital as indicators to measuring impact. So they're really relevant, but were they necessary for the reports? And we kind of decided no. So I think going forward, we probably will leave out the literature review. So I kind of learned, we shouldn't try and be too clever, because, the people that we're trying to reach might not even understand what we're trying to say. The other thing was as I mentioned, in the most recent impact report, we did in one of the first pages an outline of our key findings. So I think it's important in a report, if you want to sort of get your message across quickly, is to get to the point early in the report, and then you can go into the detail later on, so that you're actually, people are getting the message that you want them to get, and ensuring your purpose. So making sure you've got the right audience, and you're being accountable. So that's why we always will put down our recommendations to ourselves on how we're going to improve or what changes we're going to make, and then we actually outline that in the following report to say what we've actually done since the last report. And the last thing that we did was the most recent report that we did, I got someone from outside of my own team to provide me with some honest feedback. So I asked someone who I trusted completely, who I knew wouldn't just tell me that it was great to be nice, that was actually going to say, I think you need to change this. And that person actually went through our report and really was quite brutal. But it's what we needed, because I thought, well, if I'm asking this person to do it and they're saying, you don't need this, you don't need this, let's put that there. Well, then hopefully that means that more people are going to read it, and more people are going to understand it and get the message that we're trying to get across.
Absolutely. Those are such useful things, and, can certainly asking people for really brutal, honest feedback sometimes can make you quite vulnerable. But I think it comes back to remembering that audience, you know, and who is going to read it. And I think your advice around key findings, you know, it makes a lot of sense in terms of who are you sending this report to. If they're the senior executives in your organization, you want to get straight to the point right away. And then I asked Megan, because when I was looking through Megan's impact report and all of the information she had there, I thought it was really interesting, and many of you might not have actually come across the notion of dollar handles and non-financial measures. And it's a lot easier for us to compare volunteer hours with FTE. VV has our wonderful State of Volunteering report, which makes it super easy now. But I wondered, Megan, can you share with us how you approach dollar handles in the non-financial measures?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So you'll see there some examples that's from our previous report that we worked out. So dollar handles, as I mentioned before, are really, it's a fundraising term for providing an illustration of what a certain amount of money, a certain donation will go towards. So there's an example of a monetary dollar handle there, which is $126, will deliver 2 months of chlorinated water to a family fleeing conflict in Yemen. So what we did was we thought, well, let's see if we can use dollar handles to talk about volunteer hours or volunteer shifts. So it's really sort of the same way that you're talking about a donation, but you're talking about a donation of time and what that time, would have cost, say, a staff member to contribute. So the 10 volunteer hours and the 12 volunteer shifts are just a couple of examples that hopefully everyone can read there. And then another non-financial impact example that I've got there is in our supporter services team at Oxfam Australia. We have volunteers that help with really sort of tangible tasks that we're able to count. So they're quantifiable tasks. So that's just an example from one of our impact reports on the number of, for example, return to sender mail that volunteers had processed in order to save us, on future mail outs and that sort of thing. So that was just the value there. So that's just another way that we try and showcase what our volunteers do.
Fantastic. And I think, so much of this is about actually painting a picture of what people are doing. And what that can lead to for the organisation or, kind of future. It's really, really great. So I will open it up to questions from everybody else quite soon. But I thought I would just ask you both, Heather and Megan, what would you suggest for the frequency of reporting for organisations? Obviously, Megan, you have reduced your frequency a little.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, or for us at Oxfam personally, we've just gone from quarterly to 6 monthly. So and that was really because we just didn't have the resources to do it more often than that. So that's what we're going to do going forward. And I think just for suggesting to other people, I think really it's just keeping an open mind. I think every organisation will be different. And if the reporting period that you start with doesn't feel right, you just change it like we did to the next one.
Fantastic. Heather, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think thinking about what other documents there are that you could maybe include your information in. So does your report need to be a standalone document, or is it about having a section in your annual report or having a section in quarterly board reports? So yeah, I would just say think about what else is happening and how you can streamline and align with that.
Fantastic. And then really about to go out to questions to everyone else, so I hope you're busy typing in the chat, but I just thought I would ask you both whether you have any recommendations for organisations looking to get started. So we'll start with you, Heather.
I think I've got a few. I think get stuck in. When you find yourself doing these things, I think you'll learn and you'll find it's easier than it seems before you've started. So I think the first thing is get stuck in. I think the second is prioritize. So instead of trying to monitor 24 outcomes with, 10 indicators for each outcome, think about the 1 or 2 things you really, really want to focus on. And I loved Megan's example of looking at how volunteering could lead to paid work, and that is a clear outcome that is linked to volunteering. So yeah, maybe think about those things that are really meaningful to your organization and focus your efforts on them.
Fantastic. Megan, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Sure. Look, I think when you're getting started, I think you really, like I said, you really need to keep an open mind. So always look for ways to improve. And the first report is definitely not ever going to be perfect, and it shouldn't be, because there's always room to improve. And I think, like I said, getting some honest feedback from someone that you trust within your organisation is really important. And just really start with basic metrics. Like, don't try and be too clever, don't put too much thought, or not too much thought, but just don't try and make it too tricky for yourself. Just get it out there, and then once it's out there, then you can focus on what you're going to do differently for the next one.
Fantastic. And then we have one question that's come through, and I'd encourage other people to send through questions. So I'll really, I guess, probably focus this one to Heather. Sue's asked, what would you suggest when funding bodies' reporting templates are focused on quantitative data? So, how can we nudge everyone towards better data collection, really?
Yeah, such a good question, Sue. And I think a lot of organizations are coming up against this one. I think there's a few things you can do. Lots of our clients directly approach their funders and they say, we think we could report better than your template. Are you open to us coming back to you with a better template? And it's amazing the amount of times they say yes. So I think you can go directly to them. I think another option is tapping into peak body or advocacy organizations like Volunteering Victoria and asking them to campaign to government on your behalf. And I think my third suggestion would be, if you can't actually incorporate it in the formal report, can you share it through another means? Is it about a social media post and tagging a key government stakeholder? Or when you have an in-person meeting, sharing a really powerful case study? So just looking at those other avenues you have for information sharing. And Sue, happy to expand further if that doesn't fully answer your question.
Fantastic. I think those are such useful ideas for advocacy, because of course we know that sometimes we're not in the decision-making seat when it comes to producing these reports. Anyone else? I'll do one further call out for any questions. Otherwise, we might wrap it up there. I'd just like to thank both you, like Megan and Heather, you both for your time and your expertise. I think this has been such an informative webinar and really hopefully useful to those of you who are just getting started. But I can't wait to see all the different ways in which we're representing impact out in the sector. The other thing I would encourage you guys to do is, if you are embarking on this journey, share with others, talk to other people about what they're doing. We're not all the same type of organisations in the volunteering sector, which can sometimes be a challenge, but hopefully that diversity in approaches will lend strength when it comes to assessing impact. So I've seen no other questions come through, so obviously you guys are all sorted, but yeah, thank you Megan and Heather, and I wish you all a great afternoon.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Sarah. Bye-bye.
Have a great afternoon. Bye.